Talk about the final a little bit last week?
No.
So here's the great news from Jonathan. Jonathan's been through all of the fund formation stuff and said you all did an excellent job and are going to get really high marks. And as an added bonus, he's not going to put any of that material on the final. So what that means is all the material on the final is from my lectures, the part that I gave personally. I mean, Jonathan's pieces are, are valuable, but if I didn't talk about it, it won't be on the exam, the final exam. So to give a recap, right? My section of material past the midterm is on preferred terms, right? So you have a book that talks about what the preferred terms are. You have some excerpts that we put online saying here's investor favorable and company favorable and kind of middle of the road terms. You have a set of video content that talks through a description of what those terms are designed to do, and we covered those terms in class specifically. The hardest thing you have to do with those terms, I think, is to be able to apply the liquidation preference specifically to the math for an exit for a business. So that's what I'm planning on spending whatever remainder of this time you guys want to spend on, is going through and practicing some of it. But just as a recap for preferred terms, right, you're going to have to understand the basic definitions. Like you're going to have a matching section specifically. You're going to have to be able to match terms with their definitions. You're going to have some basic true-false questions like you had before. It's been a couple weeks since I looked at my draft of the final. Matching section, true-false section. Oh, you've got this comparison section. And the comparison section is, here's, for one given preferred term, here's two verbal, written out descriptions. Which one of those is investor favorable, right? And you guys should be able to identify that. And there's two ways to do it, right? One way is you just memorize all of them in advance if you've got like superhuman memory skills. And the other is go through and learn what the differences are, and then you should be able to spot them. For example, if you have a dividend and one of the dividends is 12%, one of the dividends is 8%, which one's investor favorable? 12%, right? You'd rather have 12 than 10 or 8 as an investor, right? It's those kind of specifics. On some of the true-false sections, you want to know some basics about things like, there's differences between the investor favorable and the company favorable, where there might be some true-false questions that ask you about some of those detailed specifics, like if this thing is true, is this more investor favorable or not? Right? I know there are at least a couple of true-false questions I just wrote that way. All right.
What did you mean by matching?
Matching, like here's a term and here's a description of the term.
Okay.
You have to be able to put those two together, right? Some of the terms are not obvious, so if you haven't paid attention in class, like some of the terms you actually think do different things than what they really do, right? So that's an obvious place for you to mess those up. Okay. Another thing we talked about when we went through the preferred terms, since we didn't go through in high-level detail like you get on the videos, is there are some cases where the book will say, or the description we looked at in class will say, it's taken from the book, this particular scenario is investor favorable. But then we talked about in class a couple of reasons why that's not always true. Okay? Anybody remember any of those? Information rights. Okay, why? What does the book say you want as an investor for information rights?
All of it, as much as you can get.
Okay, you want as much information as you can get. Anything else?
Often.
As often as you can get it. Anything else?
As great a detail as you can.
And you don't
Yeah.
want it distributed to
Anybody else?
And you want as high quality as possible, right? Meaning that you're going to spend a lot of money to get the information audited and reviewed. Sorry, and then your comment?
do you want to restrict who it's distributed to?
So the book term says, as an investor, you want that threshold to be as low as possible so that all investors have all the information.
Okay.
Right? So why is that not always the case in real life?
Maybe you don't want everyone
Don't
to
want.
have
One at a time, okay?
Maybe you don't want everyone else to have all that information.
So maybe there's scenarios where, as a big investor, you might not want the small investors to have it, but even as a small investor, what's a scenario why you wouldn't want other small investors to have all the info?
Some of your investors could be dum-dums, and put it out in the open, reveal confidential information.
Yeah, mostly for living. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
You've got a small startup in there, taking a lot of time getting you this information when you should be out building business.
Yeah, so one of it's just literally the time involved in being able to gather and distribute that information to the investors, right? Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
As you mentioned, the cost. It's expensive to get that information out.
Yeah, and those are related, right? So it's cost both in terms of time and in terms of whatever the actual dollars are to be able to distribute that. Okay. All right, so that's one example of a scenario. We talked about a couple in class where they're actually different. The book's opinion of what's most investor favorable, sometimes debatable.
What were some of the other ones?
Anybody else want to throw some out? Pardon?
The board composition?
All right, so what does the book say about board composition?
Of 7.
No. Well, what's the book say is the most investor favorable board composition? It's 3, right?
3.
And who gets to pick those 3? Yeah, so the investors pick 2 of the 3, and then they agree on the 3rd of the 3, right? So that's a very investor favorable board, right? What's a scenario where you might be better off with a different board structure?
If you're not that versed in the technology you're dealing with.
You mean as an investor?
Yeah,
Okay. And why is that fundamentally?
you need to understand what you're up against.
So
the
why would
technology.
having a bigger board allow
Oh, a
you-
bigger board.
Yeah.
You can put industry experts in there and still have the financial guys over there.
Yeah, so there's some ability to have other people in the industry who are experts in this field, right? And I think we talked about they could have technology experience, they could have some sort of channel or distribution experience, they could have investment banking or kind of contacts in the whoever you might sell this company to in the future. I've seen that a lot, right? Where you go to sell the business and it turns out somebody on the board makes a phone call to their buddy at this other company and says, hey, I'm on this board, we're going to sell this company, are you interested in making an early offer? That happens all the time, right? So those kind of scenarios are really valuable for having somebody that's independent, right? While we're talking about independent, what's another reason why it's really helpful to have an independent member on the board? Yeah.
If by independent you mean not financially tied to the company as it profits, then you can get honest judgments from them. They're not going to be biased by the profit they're making from the company.
Yeah, that's true. And what did we talk about for a specific example that happens where it's really beneficial to have somebody that's a third-party objective person that can weigh in?
Valuation?
Yeah, evaluation. Why though?
For when the lawsuits happen after everything gets sold.
Yeah, so specifically, if you have a valuation like a down round valuation and somebody gets washed out in investment financing, it's not in those people's interest to speak out and make too big of an issue when it happens, right? Because if the company goes on to do something super successful, you can take all the money you would have made and then hire attorneys on a contingent basis and say, see, we should have had that money. Right? Okay. Any other examples you guys remember from class about things that are different in the book than they are in real life? It's a pretty good set. Okay. The last page, so 100 points out of 250 points on final, like on midterm, is going to be this math section, where you have to go through, and I'll give you a bunch of parameters about the financing transaction. Okay? You'll have to figure out how to back into it and figure out what the ownership percentages look like. You'll have to figure out specifically what the liquidation preference is and who the liquidation preference gets distributed to. And then you'll have to add up and say, all right, here's where all the money goes, right? If we have X million dollars coming out of this transaction, here's how much goes back to an investor or this type of investor. And in some cases, here's how much goes to one group of investors, and here's how much money goes to another group of investors, and then here's how much is left over. I'm assuming you guys want to do a couple of those, or some of you do. Some of you are welcome to support. Any questions before we actually pull out some of those sample problems? Yeah.
So this list where we went over investor favorable, it has about 12 terms in it.
Yes.
Those are the is there more beyond that? These 12 that that we covered in class.
There aren't.
So know these and then we're,
Yeah, know those. And if there's a section on pro rata in there, there's no questions on pro rata on the final.
okay, I think pro rata is the last thing in here.
I probably should have done that. We had time to cover it, but we didn't cover it.
You need to review any of the material from the first year, or, yeah, the material.
You don't, it's not cumulative, with the exception of the fact that if you can't do the math from the midterm, you really won't be able to do the math on the final. So that piece is cumulative, right? You need to have that basic set. Anything else?
It's just, I put it on YouTube, so after
I think
class
we've
I'll
done
write
a
it
couple
down for
of
you.
those. Final sample problems that are done. So I'm relying on you guys a little bit to see which ones you want to do. I'd rather do the ones that you have done first. So those of you that are tired of this can go home, and then we'll go back and do the ones we've already done for people that are still on.
Is it gonna be a 2-hour time limit again,
No, I think it's 3.
or a 3-hour?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I'm probably going to be gone next week. I'm getting asked to go to London. I would probably do that. I don't know if Jonathan is available, so we may have some third party, like a former student or some of these other professors come in here and kind of proctor the exam. It'll automatically become available a couple minutes after 6 o'clock next week. I will ask whoever's in here to kind of take a, like count how many people are in the room and have a sign-in sheet where you actually sign in, so that we know you actually came to class to take it. Or we might restrict it just to the IP addresses that are here physically in this room, so you have to be on this wireless network to take it. But I'll try and get a former student, right? Because I'll try and get somebody with a key, so that in case you have any questions about the exam, like some of you had some questions about the midterm, you've got somebody that can answer them. Yeah.
It's not open book then.
Not open book, not open
Can't look
notes.
at our terms.
Nope. That would make this exam really easy.
That's very fun.
So there's
Third
a couple ways for me to put this exam together, right? I can make it open book and open notes, and then make the exam just super, super hard for you guys.
No.
Or I could let you not use your notes, and then I could make it really easy for you guys.
There is a third option.
What's the third option?
Open notes really easy.
Yeah.
Just a
So
hug.
I have seen a professor or two in the past. I do not have the ability to pull this off at the university. Who just says, all right, today's the first day of class. If you don't want to come to class anymore, just sign your name up on the sheet and I will give you an A and you never have to come to class anymore. Because if you don't want to come to class, I don't want to have to see you in class anymore. And on an occasional time, somebody has taken them up on the offer, gone up in front of the rest of the class, put their name down, and then left. Although more than once, the people that sign up for the class hear about the class being cool, and then they actually come back into class, even though they sign up for not having to go. So I do not have that luxury. Right? I'm not a tenured professor. I'm an adjunct. I've been 7 years here. I'm still relatively junior, mostly because I have a day job. All right. Questions about this section? Do you guys remember which ones we've done? I'm sure we've done 1A, 1A through C, and 1D through F. I don't think we've done this one yet. You guys have a request, or you want to just do this one?
Let's just start there.
Okay. So, the first paragraph still applies, right? Company has this post-money valuation from Series A. In this case, they've got 4 investors. There's no liquidation preference on the first round, but then it needs some money. And it gives the investors a liquidation preference on this flat financing round while it waits for these patents to be granted, right? And then it hopes for a higher valuation, but while it's waiting for the patents, there's some suit that gets filed, right? And they're forced to sell at less than they would like to ideally, okay? So if the original $10 million has a 1x liquidation preference, right? So the first Series A round has liquidation preference. And then they have $9 million in paid capital. There's a 1x on the Series A, there's a 2x on the Series B, and you sell the company for $12 million. How much do each of the investors get? What's the multiple return for them, and how much money is left? How do you do this one?
Okay, so
It looks like there's a trick in there, like you
Yeah.
get to a point and you're like, wait a minute, I can't do this. But then if you keep thinking through it, it's not really a problem. But does anybody want to throw out a way to start this? What's something you can do to start it?
You know the final valuation,
Pardon?
you know after round A that the value is 10 million?
Okay, so I think you were talking about, let's do this.
Yeah, AB, yeah,
Pre plus round equals post,
post.
okay? You've
Oh,
got
and
a
it-
series A and a series B, and you're gonna say,
Post
this
of
number's
10.
10 million, okay? Which means,
Which means that the, what did it say, the round was, we're on G, right?
yeah, I think we're doing G, H, and I. I won't have like one number with like 26 different letters behind it on the final. Make it a little easier than
So the round is flat.
that. So the round's flat, what does that mean?
So the pre is 10 and
The
B.
pre is 10.
Okay, so this is 10.
Round is 5 million.
Okay, the B round is 5 million, so the post money is
15.
15. Okay, what else do you know?
They put in 4, don't they put it, isn't the round in round A 4 million?
Yeah, but how do you know that? Yeah, so the paid in capital is 9, which means this here. This is a 4, which means what about this?
6.
Okay. So that's one way to start this. You should just go through and figure out what this looks like, okay? So what do you do now?
So we sell for 12 million.
Well, hang on. If you're going to go to this trouble, I would do something else before you figure
Figure out
out
ownership
what.
share.
Put in an ownership
I would go to
share,
the trouble to figure out where the ownership is. What's the ownership after the A round?
40% to the BC,
So it's 40%
or 10% to each.
investors total, or 10% investors each, and it's what for the entrepreneur? 60%. Okay. Okay, how about after the B round?
They get diluted down to like 27%, don't they? Doesn't the 40 go to?
I don't think it's 27. Somebody want to do the math for us?
So you're,
Well, they own 40% of 2/3 of the 15 million,
Okay, how do you get to 2/3?
because 5 goes into 15 million 3 times.
Okay, so I would just do this. I would say,
Shane, can you turn the light on up there?
better?
Yeah.
Anybody else want to take a shot?
15%.
Besides throwing out a number, you want to walk through how to get to a number.
So I said they had 10% beforehand, 10% of 10 million, and the second round is just 1 million.
Okay.
And then they each threw in an extra 1.25, that's just 5 divided by 4
Yep.
people, investors. So that gives you a total of 2.25 divided by 15 million is 15%.
Okay, does everybody follow that? Okay, so he's saying, look, the investors each have 10%. 10% of 10 million is $1 million, right? That math is good because if you divide 4 by 4 investors, it's also 1 million, and the round's flat, so it hasn't done it per day, right? That is solid. Plus, you're saying
1.25.
1.25, but you're getting 1.25 by saying, look, 5/4, 5 million divided by 4 investors equals 1.25 million.
So is there someone that says that all 4 gone in, or are we just assuming that all 4 went in on the second round?
Yeah,
Says
I was
in the first
confused. I thought it was
paragraph
just
that
new.
they're all- This is all one problem from the very top.
Yeah, it's all one
So
problem,
one of the ones
so,
up there, okay.
yeah, 4 equal investors. Although this is the kind of thing where you could ask, and I would just tell you, right, if it weren't obvious in the problem. Okay, so 1 plus 1.25 equals 2.25 divided by 15 total, right? That's the post-money valuation equals
0.15 for 15%.
Okay. Okay, 15%, right? And you've got 4 of those. So this is the amount percentage each. And if you had to do the total,
It'd do total between 40 and 60.
Yeah, so, or 60% total. And if you wanted to check your work, what would you do?
Go back to the company's original 60%, which is 6 million. 6 million that they keep, divided by the 15 million is also 40%.
Right, so what you're saying is 6 plus 4 is 10, 6/10 is this 60%. 60% of 10 is still 6 million bucks. 6 million bucks divided by 15 million post money for the second round, right? Equals 40% entrepreneur. 60 plus 40 equals 100%. That's how you check your math on that and make sure you did it right. Is you figure out how much for the investor, how much for the entrepreneurs, how much all total. Okay, so now what do you do?
You got what material preferences.
15% times 15.
Okay, so you figure out who said liquidation preferences. All right, so how do you do that?
Series A comes first, right?
First round.
And this is back to the other comment, which is, hey, where did 12, what did we say? Is this 12 million bucks?
Yeah.
12 million.
Yeah, so where does $12 million go?
That's what you actually sell it for, so you lost. It's not 15 million anymore, it's 12 million.
Okay, so you've got 12 million sale, minus the liquidation preference. In this case, what's the liquidation preference?
Round one is 10 million.
Okay, and how do you get 10 million?
You just said it's a 1x preference.
It's 1x for every investor, so it's not 10 million, it's, everybody gets their 1
Or
million.
4 million, I meant.
So 4 million.
Okay, so that's 4 million for the
Round A.
Round A.
Series A liquidation preference. Okay?
And then
So what
10,
next?
and 10 million for Series B.
Okay, so 2 times
5 million.
5 million.
Uh-oh, out of money.
So this one is 10 million. So in this case, it doesn't really matter if you're saying, well, I don't know how to do this because I don't know. You pay the Series A liquidation preference first, you pay the B first. In practical terms, if you're the later investors, you almost never give the Series A investor seniority, but sometimes the Series B investors will say, we need to get paid first before the Series A guys get paid. And there's some sort of stack. But because the investor group is the same, it doesn't really matter how you figure it out, right? All the investors are still going to get how much a piece?
15%.
They're all gonna get 25%.
They're all going to get 25% of the
15.
of
The-
$12 million.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that's all.
Right? So there's only 12 million bucks, so each investor is going to get how much in actual dollars?
3 million.
3 million. Right? You guys get where that comes from?
Yeah.
So you've got this liquidation preference, you have to pay that first. And if there's not enough money to pay the liquidation preference, all the money from the liquidation preference goes to investors and none goes to the entrepreneur. So immediately this makes 1I really easy. There's no money left for employees, right? So
If you can't satisfy the liquidation preferences in terms of value, you just evenly distribute the proceeds from the sale amongst investors. So say if someone invested in well, maybe I won't complicate it too much, but-
yeah, you can for my exam, but literally you can write the docs any way you want it. Like I mentioned about this nested stacking schedule, if you had 6 or 7 rounds of financing, like Control 4 here in townhouse, right? Control 4 is a big home automation group. They have like a Series G or a Series H or a Series I, right? They've got a lot of financing rounds. And sometimes those financing rounds are not flat or up rounds. Sometimes those financing rounds were down rounds. So in those cases, there's some sort of line that gets drawn that says, this liquidation preference is more senior to this other, its previous liquidation preferences. And then you have to go back in through the stack and figure it out. So literally you could have, instead of 2 financing rounds, right? You could have 8 or 10. And some of them could be up rounds and some of them could be down rounds. And they could all have different liquidation preferences. And at the end of the day, you have to go back in and figure out, all right, we sold this company for $200 million, and you just go back up the stack and figure out where all the money goes.
But
Right? It won't be that complicated on an exam, right?
Go ahead.
So let's say you're an investor, you don't have a lot of money, you just got in on this early, you're like Series A investor. How in the world could you protect yourself? You put like $1 million in, And, then there's up rounds, down round, a down round, you completely, you're out. How would you protect yourself?
So you're really
Because
asking
you don't
two
have
different-
enough money.
You're really asking two different questions, right?
Yeah.
One question I think is, if you're an angel investor and you don't have preferred stock, how do you protect yourself?
Sure.
And the answer to that is you don't. Because you're gonna have to vote when the company says, hey, we need more money, such and such firm in the Bay Area is offering this institutional money. You've got to make a decision as to whether you want to weigh in or not as to whether that's a good idea. But if you have a relatively small ownership percentage of the company, unless you've got a bunch of friends to like call up and say, hey, we really don't want to do this, it's not going to make any difference. The company's just going to do what the company wants to
So
do.
just because a big institution could put in more money and there's like a down round and you have no protection, you could just lose all your money even though the company is profitable.
That is totally true. So you can
And
see
it's
how
expired, right?
the whole industry is ripe for shareholder type suits. And you can see how when the laws change and they let you spend $10,000 even though you're still in school and you don't have any investment history experience, but the laws change so you don't have to be accredited anymore to invest in somebody's startup. You can see how somebody's still going to get bent after losing their $10,000, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays because people that invest professionally for a living, tend to come in at the later stages and have a bunch of terms to like take advantage of that. And it's not like it's really unfair the way they take advantage, right? Because they have all these preferred stock terms, right? They have a liquidation preference, they need a dividend, they need these other types of rights, right? What happens? What do they give up? Price, right? They spend more money. Like they get a smaller ownership percentage of the company because they give a higher value for the business, which is good for you as an early investor until things go sideways, right? It's just a risk trade-off that the company's going to take, that you're not going to be able to influence what that trade-off is.
Yeah, in that case though, if I put in 10,000 and the company had a down round just because more money and then I'm out, but then the company went really profitable, I would feel like I got robbed. And I would probably go beat people up. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Or sue.
Yeah. You don't have a lot of physical assaults. I think the law's pretty clear on that one. But the way you protect yourself for that is you know in advance what the risks are for your money you invest.
Yeah.
You have additional money, right? So when the company goes way down in value, what do? You investigate, right? You write a check. You're like, too bad for the fellow chumps that like invested with me that don't have any more money, but this company's great. I'm gonna make a fortune now that the value's down. Let me put some money back in. And almost always you would get the ability to make additional investments if the valuation goes down or if there's additional investments under some sort of controversy. Because that's one of the arguments you would make is, hey, I didn't get a chance to protect my investment. So it's really common in a distressed financing for the preferred share, the new shareholders or the big investors to say, here's what we're doing, here's what the terms are. Anybody that's currently in, you can come in for whatever your pro rata share is, whatever your proportionate share is. And almost nobody does.
Yeah, but you have no money, you're a small investor, you can't do the pro rata thing, you can't keep your same percentage.
It's totally true, right? But as an institutional investor, same thing happens to me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, NEA and Lightspeed, they just, they take this really big stick and they just beat me with it, right? They essentially said to me on Fusion.io, if Fusion.io runs out of money and your firm runs out of money, we'll take 10 of your shares of preferred stock and we'll convert them into 1 share of common stock. We'll cut 90% of your value. These are the biggest institutional firms in the country, like beating up on little Utah firms, right? Freaking playground holdings. It's all legal.
You don't want to go slash their tires?
Well, we made a lot of money. So, and frankly, it's not our money, right? I mean, it's JP Morgan's money, is who it is. It's your parents' pension funds, right? Or the local police officers and the local teachers. It's their pension money that we were making money for.
Oh, that's okay.
That makes it okay. Yeah. All right. Other questions on this?
I was gonna say, if you have, say in the Series A, you have 3 investors. One puts in $2 million, the other 2 put in $1 million each. And then you get to the sale point. Does the division of the proceeds, is it the same way? Would it be like $6 million, $3 million, and $3 million?
Yes, it's all proportional.
It's all proportional. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's $4 million, $10 million. We're talking we cannot satisfy liquidation preferences So we're gonna divide it based on proportions of initial investment?
Yeah, everybody will just get their proportionate share. It's either gonna be, nobody's liquidation preference is senior, so you'll take whoever has a liquidation preference and you give everybody the same percentage.
Okay.
Like if you can't give them 100% of their liquidation preference, they'll all get the same amount.
Got it.
Or it's gonna be that there's some sort of stack, and it depends on who's in the class.
Okay.
All right. Other questions on how the liquidation preference gets calculated?
Just quickly,
Yeah.
if in that situation with the angel investor with the money, how does it look at the end if he does get diluted down and he can't reinvest more money? Does he get some of his capital back, or does he get it back?
So the question is, what happens in the end to the angel investor? And it depends on whether the angel investor has common stock or whether they have preferred stock. And it depends on the stack of the liquidation preferences. So if the angel investor has common stock, which is most of the time the case, what happens in this scenario we just talked about?
None.
They don't get anything, right? We're describing a scenario where the entrepreneur gets nothing, but literally everybody that has common stock will get nothing in that case. Right? They'll lose that money, only the institutional investors. And it's actually worse than that for the angel investors, right? You're not going to have this question on an exam, but why do some of the employees still do okay if you sell a company and there's only enough money to cover the liquidation preference and their stock options are worse? They're not senior in the liquidation, yeah.
Does their shares move to whoever company acquired them?
They don't, the shares don't move. Anybody else want to take a guess?
Because they stay with the company, the shares still exist, and so it becomes more profitable.
It's because they stay with the company, but it's not because the shares still exist. Anything else? Think about this for a second. You're hot shot, super big company. You get a screamer deal on small startup that overspent and now has to sell at a loss, right? None of the current employees make any money on the deal. You're about to write a check. You're going to get a $40 or $50 million business. You're going to buy it for $10 million bucks. So you're getting it for 20 cents on the dollar, right? What else do you care about when you write your check for 10 million bucks?
Employee retention.
They have to be motivated.
Yeah, you have to keep those employees motivated and you care about what they think. How do you motivate those employees?
Give them options.
Signing bonus.
Yeah. Well, you could give them some sort of signing bonus, but why is an option better?
Because it
Keeps them around, yeah.
Yeah, essentially you want to start their clock on the vesting schedule. It's not like you go in and say like, oh, dude, senior engineer, I realize you got totally screwed on this company. Let me write you a big check here to give it to you. No, what you do is you say, you totally got screwed on this company, and you worked really hard on this, and I recognize that you're important to the company. Let me do this for you. Let me take the $100,000 or $200,000 you should have gotten on this transaction, and I'll give it to you in the new company, but it has a vesting schedule like your old stock options had a vesting schedule. You have to stay here for 4 years in order to get it. That's how those things usually go down. What happens to Mr. Angel Investor in that case? Does anybody write him a check saying, we realize you got totally screwed. You're super valuable to us as an angel investor. No, that doesn't happen.
But the angel has limited resources, right? I mean,
Yes.
he's not able to tap into JP Morgan or a pension fund or something. So how does he, is that just something that he builds into his fund? Is just